If you're interested in competitive PvP in Pokemon Go, and you are looking at the Timeless Cup in the Silph Arena, this video is focusing on the starter picks for the Timeless Cup. If you're interested in a Timeless Cup simplified video, like the whole meta, not just the starters, we'll link in the description to that video. If you haven't checked it out already, you should probably check it out. This video is focusing on the starters. And to help mosey us along with this, I'm going to be using my Choose Your Starter graphic that I made using artwork from the Flork of Cows. So starting out, we have taco salad here, Venusaur. So Venusaur is awesome because it's a grass type. It does the grass type job of beating the water type Pokemon, especially the Mud Boys, and it can beat all the other grass type Pokemon. It's got Sludge Bomb, so they gotta watch out for the Sludge Bomb. And the Sludge Bomb also gives it a Hail Mary to overcome the Gen 1 here, Charizard, and the Chicken Strip. So definitely a really solid, awesome pick for your starter type in the Timeless Cup meta. But Venusaur is not without issue. And one big issue it has is that poison types exist. I feel like poison types are pretty big right now in the Timeless Cup, and as time moves on in the Timeless Cup, I feel like poison types are going to become even bigger. When they come in against the Venusaur, Venusaur really can't do anything against them, but like Hope Frenzy Plant hurts enough. On top of that, Venusaur also runs into issues against Lapras. If you do not have a good IV Venusaur, so not like a high bulk Venusaur right now, Ice Shard can actually defeat it in the one shield scenario. And even if you do have the peak, the most premium Venusaur ever, you still have the opportunity to lose to Lapras in a 2-shield situation. You actually get to a CMP tie, and if your HP is just like one bit lower, the Ice Shard will kill you in the 2-shield situation. So overall, Venusaur is really awesome, but it's not without issue. Interestingly enough, these issues are resolved with Meganium, the other grass-type starter Pokemon. So Meganium here is thick as heck, right? Really big stats. And because of that thickness, it is able to overcome Lapras and Celio much more consistently than other grass-type Pokemon can. On top of that, it also has the opportunity to beat Dragonair in a lead scenario. It has to bait to get the KO, because Earthquake is going to be what, deals the final move there. But it has the opportunity to beat it, which none of the other grass types have, which is pretty freaking huge. On top of that, that Earthquake, man, all those poison type Pokemon that dunk on all the other grass types in this cup, they have to watch out for Earthquake. In even scenarios, without baiting or guessing or what, the poison type Pokemon should beat the Meganium, but if Meganium is able to learn the Earthquake, well then, Meganium just frickin' won. So as far as problems with Meganium goes, Meganium also needs the really big, good stat product IVs in order to overcome a lot of the cool, spicy matchups that make Meganium better than Venusaur. On top of that, Meganium loses to other grass-type Pokemon, especially grass-poison-type Pokemon. Meganium slapping them for double resistance, they're slapping it for single resistance. But at the end of the day, they got them poison-type charge moves. Meganium is not going to have a good time with those poison-type charge moves. Additionally, Meganium in general is worse at handling the fire-type matchups as well. Even though it does have the Earthquake, so that does help out a lot, the Sludge Bomb from Venusaur comes sooner and hits harder on them. So Meganium does come up a little bit short in those matchups too. Overall, between the two grass types, I'm more in favor of the Meganium, but I definitely do see the benefits to the Venusaur. And overall, while these two grass types are kind of, under the spotlight for the Timeless Cup, they're also pretty easily replaced by Razor Leafers. Razor Leafers just show up, they just do the job, they don't have to worry about weird bulk point nonsense, they just Razor Leaf and they win. So Razor Leafers do have an advantage over them in that respect. On top of that, against the Mud Boys, the Razor Leafers are pretty freaking violent too. So yeah, hard to switch out nowadays. Razor Leaf comes in, you're going down. So with that in mind, you might be thinking, well, why don't I go with like Razor Leaf Venusaur? And honestly, that might not be a bad option, dialing back to Venusaur, because it could mind game your opponent. If your opponent thinks that they could maybe swivel around Venusaur because they've got Lapras and Celio and the bait and the 2-shield, etc., so they decide to roll with them, thinking that they're safe from Venusaur, well, Razor Leaf Venusaur can show up and say, hey, you ain't safe. That's one reason why I'd consider Razor Leaf Venusaur. Aside from that, it's kind of strictly worse compared to the other Razor Leafers. Moving on from the grass types, we got Squart here, Swampert. And Swampert, like, these two had a lot of good qualities and some bad qualities. Swampert kind of just has bad qualities for the most part. So Swampert's an insanely powerful Pokemon in PvP in general because it's able to spam Hydro Cannon, the most powerful charge move in the entire game. Problem that Swampert runs into is everything that's good in this cup resists Hydro Cannon. Yeah, you got Dragonair, resists it. Lapras, Celio, resisted. Grass types, resisted. Kingdra, double resisted. And you're probably going to see those 5 Pokemon on a lot of people's 6 to begin with. So Swampert has a really hard time getting ahead. Now if you look at PvPoke simulations at a base, you will see that it is pulling a lot of wins. Wins that I said that it should probably lose. And that is because it's landing the Earthquake. But for it to land the Earthquake, it has to fake it out or get the bait in. And if all of your matchups that you're supposed to be winning come down to the bait getting you ahead, I feel like that's not a good spot to begin with. And on top of that, if your baits do fail, you take a pretty nasty L. If you were to compare it to the Bait Cup, the Sinister Cup, where anybody could get ahead if they land a Shadow Ball, the Bone Clubs and the Ominous Winds, those attacks were still putting in work against the Pokemon that they were fighting. And then the Shadow Ball was like the BAM, like I definitely win. For Swampert here, it just seems like Hydro Cannon's really good. It's really nice to hit stuff with, but you really want those Earthquakes. And if you miss those Earthquakes, well then, you're kind of done. On top of that, Razor Leaf is huge in this cup right now. I don't know how it's going to be near the end of our days in this cup, but Razor Leaf is huge, and Razor Leaf just rips this guy in half. So definitely not a good look for the Swampert. If you are considering a Mudboy type Pokemon, Wishcash. Wishcash is the one a lot of people are actually using. And the reason why is because it's able to spam the ground type damage. You know that Earthquake that Swampert really wants to hit stuff with? Yeah, Wishcash has that in spam mode. You can just rattle them off. Just Mud Bomb, all the things. One thing that could be interesting to consider if you really do want to use Swampert as your starter type Pokemon is to combo it with Wishcash. Yes, that will make you Omega weak to grass type Pokemon, but as far as the mind game goes, you will, for the most part, always be baiting your opponent's grass-type Pokemon. So if you're able to structure a team around that, you could pull ahead in a lot of matchups by taking advantage of your opponent's desire to always use a grass-type. And then because you have 2 flavors of Mudboy, you can also pick and choose which Mudboy you actually want to use for the situation. And I know that there are some risky devils out there too. Not using grass-type Pokemon? What? Yeah, and I guess against those guys you could roll double Mudboy, and that could be pretty cool. So overall, I think Swampert, a little bit more on the niche side, could work out in some risky double Mudboy strats though. Then next up, we got Blaziken, the chicken strip here, and the big claim to fame for the Blaziken is its ability to just farm down Lapras and Celio by just straight counter damaging it. Yes, it will have to use a shield so it doesn't get KO'd by the Surf or worn down too heavily by the body slams, but it's able to get that shield back by threatening the next Pokemon in with Blast Burns, which is pretty huge. Blast Burn just takes a chunk out of literally anything it hits, so really good charge move there. On top of that, it has the Blaze Kick for a bait move, and the Blaze Kick does put a pretty heavy number on grass-type Pokemon, which is awesome. So after that, you might be thinking, man, Blaziken's MVP, why isn't everybody running Blaziken? Well, Blaziken kind of falls short against like literally everything else in the meta. Yeah, water types, fire types, poison types, dragon types. Blaziken like can't do anything to like any of them. It can lose. It can threaten with a blast burn, but that's only if it got the farm, which is kind of weird, right? Yeah, so Blaziken's issue is if you actually don't catch the Lapras or the Celio on the switch, you kind of don't really do a whole heck of a lot other than threaten with one charge move and die. So kind of an awkward look for the Blaziken there. To make matters worse for Blaziken, it also loses to grass-type Pokemon. Yeah, in the one shield situation, it can lose to the Venusaur if it gets the Sludge Bomb off. And then, on top of that, Razor Leafers. If they shield all of Blaziken's charge moves, or if Blaziken, for whatever reason, feels like it can farm them with counter damage, yeah, you're going to get KO'd by the Razor Leaf. You're that frail. Your resistance is not helping you against the Razor Leaf. With those factors combined, you losing to everything else, you basically needing to catch Lapras or Celio on the switch, and then Razor Leaf coming in and ruining your life, I feel like Blaziken might be too risky of a pick to actually work out. That said, if you are able to catch the Lapras or the Celio on the Switch, well, that's huge. Moving on to a Fire-type Pokemon that isn't weak to Razor Leaf, we have Charizard, the Gen 1 perfection. Back when everything was perfect, Charizard was born, and Charizard is not weak to Razor Leaf like this chump over here. So yeah, Charizard basically straight up walls Grass-type Pokemon, much like the Venomoth does. And Venomoth is weak to Charizard. So Charizard's a Venomoth that can beat Venomoth, which is pretty freaking huge. On top of that, if you are using an Air Slash Charizard, you can beat the Dragonair in a lead scenario just by going straight Dragon Claw at it. The Fire Spin won't give enough chip damage, Air Slash will. Overall, I'm on Team Airzard over here. I don't know about you guys. Fire Spin does have better energy gains, but I think in this cup in particular, I think the Air Slash is kind of the way to go. But you can feel free to disagree with me in the comments below. So while Charizard is kind of hot Venomoth for the most part, it's not entirely hot Venomoth, in that Poison-type Pokemon actually have a pretty easy time against Charizard. So Charizard, if you're rolling with it on your team, you're going to have a strategy to deal with Poison-type Pokemon. Like I said before, Poison-type Pokemon, I feel like they're on the rise for this cup. So Charizard not having many tools against them might end up working out of its favor. And also doesn't really take charge move hits too well. So like an off-brand charge move comes in, hits the Charizard, he's not having a good time. A good example is Gloom. For example, the Purified Gloom, that return damage actually deals a pretty heavy blow to the Charizard. So Charizard, good at dealing hits, not so good at taking them. Then next up, we got Dad over here, the Blastoise, and I feel like Blastoise is a heavily underrated pick for this cup. What does Blastoise do? Well, Blastoise beats all the Mud Boys, beats all the Poison and Fire-type Pokemon, and it can beat Dragonair with a bait, with the Ice Beam. Of course, as always, you're going to want to have good bulk on the Blastoise, but I feel like Blastoise is pretty forgiving as far as its bulk points are concerned. You do want to have high HP and relatively high defense. Like for the HP, you want to have at least 127, and on the defense, you want to have at least 134. Those are pretty easy to meet. The higher they go up, the better Blastoise is going to be. But yeah, it's not such a strict bulk point Pokemon as you might think it is. So you might be thinking, like, well, Ryan Swag, why don't I just use a Mud Boy? Doesn't Mud Boys do like the same thing, but like faster? Well, Blastoise here has Ice Beam, so it's actually able to threaten Grass-type Pokemon, where all the Mud Boys just kind of get torn in half by Grass types. Wishcash does have the Blizzard, but are you really going to land the Blizzard against a Grass-type Pokemon that's completely training you, especially if it's a Razor Leafer? I don't think so. Blastoise at least has the opportunity to pull out of that situation by maybe landing an Ice Beam. Like, they got no shields, blammo. If you got prior energy, maybe you could get the bait and the blammo. I'm not saying it's going to happen all the time, but the door is open for Blastoise where the door is kind of closed for everything else. Furthermore, comparing Blastoise to a Mud Boy, you have Water Gun damage. Mudshot can't really KO things down. Water Gun can, which means you can close some matchups by just using straight Water Gun damage, which is great for energy farming for the next Pokemon that comes in. So I think overall Blastoise is a super underrated pick, and you should at least look into it if you got a good stat product one. I know that I've got one on deck to evolve on the 14th, and I might make some team changes when that time comes. Then next up we have Basil here, the Bayleaf. And Bayleaf is supposed to represent the idea of using an Ivysaur or a Bayleaf as a Razor Leafer because you don't want to limit yourself by using a starter type Pokemon. The idea that Razor Leaf at a base is better than the Vine Whip. And after making this graphic, I feel like Ivysaur might have worked out a little bit better, and Ivysaur is actually pretty good. The Bayleaf here, a little bit too spicy. The lack of the secondary typing definitely holds it back, but Ivysaur actually has some pretty good shine to it. It's got the return, it's got the Sludge Bomb, it's got the Razor Leaf, so it's basically like a Purified Gloom, but it's actually tankier than a Purified Gloom. So if you are into the idea of using a Razor Leafer and all the other starter type Pokemon really aren't appealing to you, consider using a Purified Ivysaur. That is actually not a bad choice. It's like Gloom, but slightly better. Bayleaf, on the other hand, probably going to waste your Stardust, especially since it will be better once it gets a Shadow variant, so you can get a return Bayleaf. Then finally here we have Typhlosion, the big sad. I looked into it. Why is Typhlosion always bad? On paper, it sounds like it should be good. You got Shadow Claw, you got Blast Burn, you got Solar Beam. Those should be the makings of a really good Fire-type Pokemon. I mean, okay, the Solar Beam maybe that ain't it. But Cantonian Ninetales is doing really well, and it can use the Solar Beam. So what gives, man? I looked into it. Turns out Typhlosion has the Charizard tier bulk, which isn't good bulk. And it doesn't have the secondary typing to help it out against the Razor Leafers. So think about our spicy chicken here, dying to Razor Leaf. Yeah, this guy might run into that same kind of issue. On top of that, it doesn't have a good bait move. This guy's got Blaze Kick. This guy's got Dragon Claw. This guy's low energy cost bait move is Blast Burn. And that ain't a bait move, man. That's like the KO move right there. So I feel like Typhlosion can work. It will work for some people, of course. I mean, enough people try it. It's bound to work sometime, right? But I think at the end of the day, the Big Sad is just sad and will not perform. If you're considering the Big Sad, consider Charizard or Blaziken. And then as far as the other starter type Pokemon go, yeah, no. I know Sceptile looks kind of cool. It's got all this variety to it, but at the end of the day, it hits too softly and is too fragile itself to really pull ahead. So yeah, I love Sceptile as a Pokemon. It's one of my faves, but it's just not happening in this cup. And there you have it, the starter type Pokemon for the Timeless Cup. If you got any questions on this content, comment below, let me know what's up, and I'll be happy to help you out. Which starter are you going with for the Timeless Cup? I'm curious. Drop a comment, tell me who your starter is. And if you enjoyed this content, you want to see more like it, well then make sure to subscribe to SwagTips, man.